Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Roompact's ResEdChat podcast. This podcast series is a digital variety hour of presentations, interviews, webinars, all sorts of content of interest to residence education and residence life professionals. And today on the podcast, what we're going to do is I've got my iPad here with a number of different questions that you all have submitted about residential curriculum and curricular approaches. And I thought what I'd do is I'd address some of those questions that you may have on how you can improve your practice. So let's go for it. So the first one I have here, this question comes in, it says, where can I find peer institutions to collaborate with and benchmark when it comes to developing my residential curriculum? This is a great question and one that I frequently get, especially from folks that are starting on their journey, that are wanting to look at examples, or from folks that are more developed in their curricular journey and they're wanting to know how they're doing and what ways they can improve their practice. So when it comes to identifying these institutions, probably the easiest way to do it is to do a look at all the different institutions that have ever attended or presented at the Institute on the Curricular Approach. Now, many of you may know ACPA's Institute on the Curricular Approach. It is the institute that teaches you how to do a curriculum, how to structure it, and all of the things that are related to it. Now, over the past few years, there have been a number of different what we call showcase institutions. Now, showcase institutions apply to present at the Institute. And these institutions meet certain standards in terms of their curricular development that the faculty of the Institute reviews to make sure is sound. So they're basically like peer-reviewed institutions that you can look to as an example of who's doing something particularly well. So if I were to look for institutions to benchmark against, I would probably look to those showcase institutions as my guide. Now, where can you find out who those institutions are? We actually make that really easy for you. So if you go to curricularapproach.com, it will redirect you to a resource site on Roompact's website that includes a listing of all the institutions that have ever showcased. That can be a great place to begin. We also include a number of documents, websites, things like that, that other folks have posted online that can also help you in this benchmarking. Now, depending on your institutional type, you might look at different of these showcase institutions differently. So if you're a small private or a specialty college, you might want to look for institutions that are like you. Same thing goes if you're a large flagship public. Now, there's a broad range of institutions that do this kind of work. So it's never one thing, can we do this because we're an institution of this type? The truth is any institution can do this, but it may look different. And so that might be one of the reasons why you want to look at an institution that's more similar to your type than another. All right, we've got a second question that I found here. The question comes to us, it says, where can I find examples of facilitation guides? Now, what are facilitation guides? Facilitation guides are sometimes called lesson plans, and they're the detailed outline of what someone would need to know in order to enact this learning experience that students are going to go through. So if you're a Department of Residence Life, you're going to have a facilitation guide for this one program, a facilitation guide for this instance of an intentional conversation, a facilitation guide for this bulletin board. It'll include all the knowledge as well as all the things a person would need to know in order to enact that learning strategy. Now, because of that level of detail, you won't often find examples of facilitation guides online. There are a few institutions that do make them available to the general public, and you can find them online. And if you go to that website I referenced recently, which was that curricularapproach.com that we maintain here at Roompact, we include a list of the institutions that do provide that. But beyond that, if you want to look for other facilitation guides, my best advice for you would be to reach out to other institutions that want to do something similar. And the better way you can kind of phrase that question is ask for a specific type of facilitation guide. If you go online and you post to the Residential Curriculum Curricular Approach Facebook group and say, can everyone show me all their facilitation guides? You're probably not going to get a response. But if you know you're working on one, let's say, related to roommate agreements, if you ask something very specific like that, there'll probably be a number of people that would be willing to help you out. So ask specific questions, ask institutions that you may know or that you may trust or that are similar to your profile, and they could probably help you out. All right, well, let's go to another question here. The next one I have, this is interesting. It doesn't exactly relate to a residence life or education department, but it does relate to a curricular approach and actually has something to do with living on campus, or actually not living on campus. So the question is Can a curricular approach work on a campus with a large commuter population? I love this question. Yes, absolutely. There's nothing unique about a residential curriculum that is limited to a certain subset of students. One of the reasons why the Residential Curriculum Institute became the Institute on the Curricular Approach is because a lot of folks were broadening the focus of the approach to incorporate more of a division-wide experience. So it can be used in any number of departments within student affairs. Commuting life could also be one of those things. It's just probably going to look a little bit different. And in particular, it's probably the strategies that are going to be different. So if I think of a residence life department, many of the strategies we might do in-person events, RA meeting one-on-one with a student and having a conversation, group facilitation, things like that. Those are the same types of things you'd want to replicate with a commuting population, but obviously it's going to look a little bit different because you don't have that captive audience that's living with you. So when it comes to commuters, you might want to think of other strategies that you could use. Maybe more digital engagement. What does that mean through newsletters that you might email out? If you have a commuter center on campus, how are you using that? When are your students there? Maybe because they have presumably other lives that are doing other things, then you could offer a webinar perhaps during a common lunch hour and combine it with things. So the creativity with a commuter population is really going to run into what are the strategies that you're going to use. And you're going to want to use things probably that don't require physical presence all the time in order to be successful. Now, the other thing I'd think about as it relates to commuting populations and a curricular approach would be the demographics of that commuting population. Many commuters might be of a diverse age range, different identities. They're probably more likely to have children or families that they're taking care of than you might find in a general undergraduate residential population. So that's the other thing you'll need to think about in terms of your goals and your outcomes for your curriculum. How might those look different than what you might find on a traditional residential campus? Because your students are going to help drive what those goals and outcomes should be. And because your students are different, your curriculum is going to be different. All right, we've got 2 more questions here that I wanted to get to. Next one is, where do RHAs and hall councils fit into a curricular approach? Aha, so this is a great question that I've received numerous times. There's a few different ways you can approach it. No one way is right or wrong. It may depend on the development of that RHA or hall council on your campus, how far along they are, the support services that you provide to them, but there's a few different ways that it can be incorporated. Now, some schools will take the approach that the curriculum relates to learning, and that's what the professional staff are developing and enacting in the residence life setting. And so what they'll do is they'll have the RHA or hall council focus more on the community life, the fun activities, the social activities, things of that sort. So under that kind of mental model, really the RHA and the hall council don't really need to do work with the curriculum so much as they are supporting it by providing those social outlets, which we all know are critical for our students, that run alongside the work of the curricular approach. So in that sense, the RHA and hall council are really still integral to a curriculum, but what they're doing is providing those social outlets so it allows the folks working on the curriculum to focus on the learning aspects. Now, that doesn't mean that RHAs and hall councils don't have anything to provide when it comes to learning for students. They may still do other activities, but because they're the ones that are directing them, it's probably not something that you want to bake into your curriculum. In other words, if the RHA decides we're not going to do this year, your whole curriculum isn't going to fall apart. Now, I have seen other ways in which RHA and hall councils themselves have been treated as part of a curriculum, meaning if one of your learning goals for your students is leadership and interpersonal skills, being involved in the RHA and the hall council are a means of helping students get them. So it's their actual participation in these groups that results in the infusion of the curriculum. It's not the work that the students themselves are doing as student leaders, right? It's the development of those leaders that is part of your curriculum. So at one institution that I formerly worked at, that's actually how we approached it. And so one of our goals for our students was leadership. And so because of that, we invested a lot of time and energy in the leadership development activities of our residence hall leaders. We had a curriculum for our hall council members on how they could learn about how to run a meeting, how to interact with others, and we created that into the learning opportunity. I personally think that's probably one of the best ways of doing it, and that can also combine with the idea that RHA is there for helping social and connections and maybe some occasional learning things on their own, but their work itself isn't directly related to the curriculum. All right, so we have one last question here. Where does residence life community building fit into a curriculum? Gosh, I should have gotten to this one before the last one because I kind of gave some previews as to what my answer would be in the last one. Community building is critically important. Social interactions, having fun, going to dinner together in the dining hall, going to see a movie, these are all important aspects of a student's residence life experience. Not everything needs to be curricularized and brought back to student learning. If an RA wants to take their students out for dinner at a dining hall, I don't need them to try to shoehorn in a learning outcome into that experience. Just let them go and have fun. Now, could an RA that's maybe particularly adept kind of include that just in the conversations that they're having with the student? Absolutely. So there are some learning moments that can be infused in that, but I don't think you need to force it. Students still need to have social interactions and connections, and that really is what functions alongside a well-working curriculum. So you do need to invest some time and some energy there. I think the difference is in the past under program models, we may have tried to make that a whole complex process. When I worked with certain undergraduate students to do this, I just told them, do some kind of social activity once a week. I don't need you to fill out paperwork for it. I don't need you to put assessment outcomes to it. Just do it, let us know it happened, who was involved in that, and that's good enough. So part of thinking through kind of your community building is don't overcomplicate it. Don't create more work or additional work for your staff where you don't have to. I'd rather have them save their time and their energy for those learning moments than spending it on needless paperwork or overdeveloped social activities for their residents. Simple things work just as well. So that's where community building fits into a curriculum. Now, those are all the questions I wanted to address today, but if you have other questions that you're wanting me to answer, or maybe have a guest on to answer for us as well, just submit them on social media with that hashtag ResEdChat, and maybe in a future episode, we'll get to your question. Thanks, everyone.